One of the things that is sort of a benefit of showing films that are these two films, Down by Law and Limits of Control, which have this long time span between them, is it got me thinking about the difference in the form of the films. And instead of starting with Limits of Control, Down by Law was part of three films that sort of resembled one another: Stranger Than Paradise, followed by Mystery Train, Down by Law in between them. Sometimes those are called a trilogy. I don't know whether that's a critical conceit or whether you meant it as a trilogy, but I've read that it's a trilogy, and it's unimportant whether it is. But what is important is that they all three shared multiple storylines. And part of that we owe thanks, a debt of gratitude to Robert Altman, who took multiple storylines from William Faulkner and others. And they're different from somebody like Akira Kurosawa's Rashomon, which had multiple points of view, but it was all the same story. The thing about multiple storylines is that it tempts us as audience members to feel omniscient, like we know something that the characters don't know, that we have control over the situation because we know the things that the people in the other storylines really don't know. And it soothes us as we watch the film that we can control the outcome. And then, of course, when we can't, the joke's on us, and we've had a good time at the movies. This film, Limits of Control, however, has a very clear line through, as Isaac de Bancole sort of represents. There are people who stream in and out of and connect and enable him to make a connection, but it's why I called it a cinema resistance, a resistance movie, because it seemed like a resistance, plot, and it seemed like it was a vector that was moving forward. And there weren't multiple storylines, there was one. And I'm wondering whether, have you thought about that? Is it because your own sort of filmmaking has become kind of cleaner and linear, more linear? I don't know. Now it's the point where I don't know what I'm talking about, but it seems as if there's a difference in the formal structure of your films, which is a much more forward drive motor in a way, even as some of the elements have dropped out and the mystery quotient has gone higher.
What? No, I don't know, because form, I love form, and although some critics, especially early on, called my films formless and plotless, I love form and I love plots. I love the form in literature and movies and storytelling. I'm really a kind of classicist in a way, in that I'm very comfortable in the form of, at least in my head, of three parts to a story with a kind of coda on the end. Now, I think Down by Law has this. I think The Limits of Control definitely has this. Madrid, Sevilla, Almeria, with a kind of coda in the return. So these are very classical kind of things for me that I really love. As far as that direct thing on this film, it was very funny. While I was editing The Limits of Control, I realized that it was very similar in form to my very first film called Permanent Vacation, which probably no one here has seen, which is maybe better that way. But it's just a kid walking around in New York and encountering disparate people who don't really return. There's not a real plot, but you're following him. And in a way, it occurred to me while editing this that maybe it was formally closest to that than the other films, which was a kind of circling all the way back. But it wasn't conscious. But it does have these three parts, sort of three acts to it, as Down by Law, I think, does. I'm trying to remember the film since I haven't seen it since 1986. But I know it begins in New Orleans, then they're in jail, and then they escape, and then there's a kind of coda where they separate. So in a way, I seem to rely on this very simple kind of classic form, at least in my head, and I like it very much as storytelling. So for me, it's very hard to say, well, what's different, what's the same about this film or that film. You know, you mentioned Kurosawa's Rashomon, in which the stories intertwine. They're separated by perspective. But, you know, Kurosawa loved form very much. He made films like Dreams, which is a series of unrelated tales that are accumulative, you know. So he played with forms too, often very classical forms. I love the idea of multiple stories very much, from whether it's from like Boccaccio or Chaucer, or, you know, this is a very old form also that I appreciate, you know. But again, I'm so bad at analyzing any of these things. I just kind of do them, and I do know I like this kind of 3-act form. The number 3 seems to recur for me all the time. I don't even know why. I guess it's just the kind of dialectic of the imagination, you know, that one thing reacted to by another forms a third that I find very beautiful and very magical. It's, you know, it's very obvious that it's the essence of procreation, you know, 2 people form a third, you know. So it's very primal and evident, and now I'm sounding really, really pretentious. Or really stupid, I don't know. I'm a simpleton.
Can we have questions for the simpleton?
Can we have questions for the clown up here?